afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our monthly International Development and Innovation seminar series at the Open University. It's truly an honor to be here at the IKD seminar, engaging in such an important conversation. My name is Michelle and I wear many hats. I am a profit analyst at a retailer in South Africa. I am a lecturer, a mentor, and an advocate for aspiring chartered accountants. Before starting, just some rules. This video is being recorded and it will be available for playback after, so people who don't want to be featured can ask questions in the Q&A and ask to remain anonymous. You are automatically muted and the cameras will be turned off for the duration of the presentation. We will then have the Q&A at the end of the presentation, at which point you'll be able to raise your hand and unmute and use cameras to ask questions yourself. If you want to post questions as we go along, you're more than welcome to. You can do this in the chat. And finally, please follow us on X at intdev_OU, and this will be shared in the chat room right now. So let's get into it. My journey in the accounting profession has not only been about numbers and strategy, but it's also been about navigating identity, expectations, and the unspoken challenges that come with being a Black professional in this space. Today, I am very excited to talk to you about my research, Acting White, a Black Chartered Accountant's Perspective. When the COVID-19 pandemic began, most of our work and professional interactions shifted to platforms such as Microsoft Teams and Zoom. In many cases, we were required to turn our cameras on. And so the effort to look more put together began, be it clearing up your room 5 minutes before the meeting, or shifting your camera around just so that people don't see that pesky little spot on your wall, which, by the way, never bothered you before. We can all agree that it took a bit of effort. Now, imagine living your life in that manner, constantly changing the way you speak, the activities that you do, or what you eat in order to look professional, in order to fit in. This afternoon, I will present my master's research study and findings on Acting White from the perspective of a Black chartered accountant. I look forward to an open and thought-provoking discussion with you all. In today's presentation, I will begin by talking you through the background of the study, which is centered around South Africa's history on colonization and apartheid. Thereafter, I will outline the problem statement in this, and in this section, I will take some time to expand on the scope and the relevance of the study. In the methodology section, I will speak at length on the research methods employed in this study. And finally, I will speak on my research findings and results, and thereafter, I will open up the floor to questions. South Africa's history is marked by colonial rule, which took place between 1652 and 1961. Colonial rule commenced with two European powers. Firstly, with the Dutch between the periods of 1652 and 1795, as well as between 1803 and 1806. And later with the British between 1795 and 1803, as well as between 1806 and 1961. This period was marked by events such as the Dutch raiding land and the enslavement and displacement of South African locals. Following on from colonization, South Africa then became a republic in 1961. For 3 decades, South Africa was led by the white Afrikaner regime, which was known as the apartheid regime. The apartheid regime was a racist regime that dictated where Black people could live, the people they could marry, and the schools they could attend. For most of this regime, Black citizens were not allowed to become chartered accountants. In 1978, there was finally a call to ease the racial restrictions to allow for the growth of the Black middle class. As a result, Black South Africans began to enter the accountancy profession. However, the experiences of Black South Africans working in accounting firms during this time was very challenging. Article clerks, basically chartered accountants in training, reported discrimination and a lack of exposure to meaningful work. In 1994, South Africa then became a democracy, with Nelson Mandela being the first democratically elected president. This officially marked the end of colonisation and the apartheid regime. During this time, the accountancy profession saw the entry of more Black South Africans. The end of the colonial rule and the apartheid regime brought about some positive change for Black people. Black people were given equal access to jobs, to schooling, and housing. However, today, 30 years post-apartheid, the negative effects of colonial rule and the apartheid regime are still being felt. As of 2025, only 22% of CAs registered with the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants are Black. This is in stark contrast to the country's demographics. About 81% of South Africans are Black. This racial disparity is deeply rooted in South Africa's history with colonization and apartheid, which excluded Black people from pursuing certain professions. Despite the stark racial disparities in the accounting profession, there are limited studies that focus on the lived experiences of Black chartered accountants. My research study seeks to fill that gap. And so, as a starting point, the question can be posed: to be Black or to act white? Do Black chartered accountants act white in the work environment? Do they dress, eat, talk, and partake in recreational activities like white people? The acting white theory was first penned by Nigerian sociologists John Ogbu and Signithia Fordham, who conducted a study on Black American adolescents. In their study, they concluded that students' academic success was tied to them deliberately adopting white culture as part of their strategy to be academically successful. In this context, acting white was defined as getting good grades, speaking proper English, which essentially meant anything which is not African American vernacular English, and finally, acting white also meant dressing neatly. Since then, there have been various studies that have opposed the findings of John Ogbu and Signithia Fordham based on how harmful the claims are. For instance, an opponent to the theory, Hapalani, cites that the idea that academic success is tied only to assimilating the white culture is a false stereotype because Black people can be equally academically gifted. In his research, Hapalani found that Black students do not define academic success as acting white. However, they do acknowledge that the society they exist in does tend to devalue their cultural norms, and as a result, they struggle to cope. Theories of acting white and code switching have found that minority groups often code switch in environments where they are minorities. This research is therefore positioned to interrogate the factors that may pressure Black chartered accountants into acting white in the work environment as a minority. The purpose of the study is to investigate if the acting white theory extends to the accounting profession for Black South African chartered accountants. In the work environment, changing one's behavior and mannerisms to fit in with a particular group is commonly termed as code switching. Code switching is defined as the act of temporarily changing one's behavior and mannerisms to fit in with a particular group to receive a desired outcome, such as preferential treatment, employment opportunities, and to avoid the effects of implicit racial biases. It often presents itself in situations where people are a minority. For instance, in the United States of America, studies have found that code switching is a popular strategic tool among Black people to navigate multicultural relations in a bid to enhance their welfare and wealth creation. Therefore, individuals belonging to minority groups, much like Black chartered accountants in South Africa, do tend to benefit from adjusting their self-presentation. This is because research has found that through expressing common interests and experiences with members of a majority group, feelings of familiarity are fostered, which may increase the likelihood and the pace of climbing the corporate ladder. As a result of being a minority, Black chartered accountants may have to code switch in the work environment. However, code switching presents various problems. For instance, constantly trying to steer clear of falling into stereotypes is time-consuming, and it can reduce cognitive resources and ultimately impede productivity. Also, code switching may reduce authentic individualism and ultimately lead to burnout from constantly trying to fit in. Given the drawbacks associated with code switching, this study is thus important. The idea that a Black chartered accountant's success is tied to assimilating white culture is problematic because Black people should be able to pursue successful careers without devaluing their cultural norms. Through this research, I seek to answer the question, do Black South African chartered accountants need to act white to be successful in the workplace? The focus will solely be on Black South African chartered accountants working in accounting firms and commerce and industry firms. The underlying framework upon which the study is based is the critical race theory. The critical race theory originated in America and is based on America's history. Many similarities can be drawn between the history of America and South Africa, which makes this a useful framework. For instance, the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States of America is quite similar to the need for decolonization and the movements around that have come about in South Africa. The critical race theory is a body work that seeks to examine how race intersects with power, privilege, and oppressive systems in society. The critical race theory suggests that racial inequality does exist and that it is institutional in nature. This means that racism is inherent in policies and systems. In the South African context, the critical race theory explores how the history of colonization and apartheid is deeply embedded in African cultures, distorting traditional norms and leading to racial inequality. This research aims to determine whether Black chartered accountants act white in the workplace to be perceived as professionals and as a strategy to climb the corporate ladder. It seeks to really understand the lived experiences of Black chartered accountants in South Africa and how they navigate professional spaces where they are often in the minority. To determine this, a qualitative approach was followed by conducting in-depth, semi-structured, and open-ended interview questions with Black South African chartered accountants residing in Gauteng and the Western Cape. Gauteng and the Western Cape are two of the biggest provinces in South Africa. Therefore, it made sense to focus on only these two provinces as they tend to be the economic hub. As part of the data collection process, ethical clearance was sought from the University of Cape Town, and once ethical clearance was granted, a pilot study was conducted to ensure that the interview questions were sufficiently open-ended enough and answered the research questions. The participants were purposefully identified through referrals and my professional and social networks. In this selection process, I ensured that I only targeted participants with the necessary knowledge and experience to answer the research question. The selected participants were from different backgrounds and industries, including the financial services sector, the retail sector, tech, audit, and advisory sectors. However, and very interestingly, all the participants completed their articles at an audit firm. Okay, so all the participants completed their articles at one of the big four audit firms, which are namely PwC, Deloitte, KPMG. The selected participants had varying levels of experience across entry level, senior, manager, and partner roles. Each participant chose the option in the questionnaire that identified them as a Black African. Furthermore, all the participants identified English as their work language. Before the interview process, the selected participants were asked to complete a short questionnaire, and the aim of this questionnaire was just to get socioeconomic information that I used to describe my participants. Using this socioeconomic information also helped to preserve the confidentiality and anonymous nature of the interview. Interviews were conducted online on Microsoft Teams with cameras on. I found that this helped to establish a high level of rapport with the participants, which resulted in a higher level of transparency, honesty, and vulnerability from the participants. Through observing the participants' facial expressions, their tone, and their body language, I could also pick up on the participants' emotions and experiences, which really allowed for deeper insights into what was going on in their minds as they spoke to me. A semi-structured approach to the interview was taken, with open-ended questions being posed. Using the semi-structured approach gave me the opportunity to go in the room with pre-prepared questions and predetermined questions, which basically made it much easier to induce conversations. The open-ended questions also allowed the participants to fully express themselves, providing detailed responses with nuanced information on their experiences, their behaviors, and their beliefs. This helped me to gain a deeper understanding of their lived experiences, and ultimately this increased the quality of the research findings. As a researcher, I also took time and I ensured that the participants fully understood the purpose of the study, as well as the definition of key terms such as code switching, which pops up quite a lot in this research study. The participants' participation was fully voluntary and confidentially was maintained throughout the entire process. So just a table that shows the demographics of the participants. You will notice that I had 6 out of 10 female participants, and the oldest participant I had was a male who is 45 years old and fills a manager position in his work environment. The most senior level of work position I had was a partner at an audit firm and various managers in their respective working environments. Interestingly, only one participant, one female, Lerato, who will also be referred to as P9, identified Sesotho, which is her home language, and English as her home language as well. Okay, so this particular participant will prove to be quite interesting once we get into the results. On the screen, you will see the interview questions which I posed. The interview questions were drafted based on the themes that were identified in the literature review as contributing to code switching and acting white at work. These included themes such as adaptation, career progression, navigating stereotypes, and seeking social acceptance. The research philosophy is grounded in interpretivism, which suggests that truth and knowledge are subjective and based on individuals' lived experiences and their understanding of those experiences. The interviews commenced with two open-ended questions, which asked the participants about the structure of their work environments and their sense of belonging. Through these questions, I sought to build rapport with the participants and get a better understanding of the racial composition of their work environments and their perception of diversity. The third question is open-ended and asks the participants to share their career aspirations. The purpose of this question is to gain an understanding of how important career progression and success are to the participant. A review of the literature has shown that individuals from marginalized groups who are career-driven are more likely to adapt to the mannerisms and behaviors of the dominant group. The last two questions, question 4 and 5, integrated the main themes identified in the literature on adaptation, career progression, seeking social acceptance, and navigating stereotypes. These questions aimed to get an understanding of any adaptation that happens in the workplace and how Black South African chartered accountants seek social acceptance and navigate stereotypes. Thematically analyzing the data through a 6-step analysis, I found that Black South African chartered accountants are often exposed to work environments that lack racial diversity, with the dominant group being the white race. The composition and diversity in the work environment have an impact on the participants' feelings and perceptions of fitting in their work environment. As a result, the participants adapt to their work environment. Participants may adapt by incorporating changes to their speech, their dress code and appearance, their hobbies and interests, as well as their behavior. These are known as the code switching behaviors. The reasons that may lead Black South African chartered accountants into adapting are illustrated on the screen. Okay, these basically include a need for career progression, seeking social acceptance, and navigating stereotypes that may be associated with Black South African chartered accountants. The illustration on the screen shows that changes in speech, dress code, and appearance are often associated with the need for career progression. On the other hand, changes in one's interests and hobbies are linked to seeking social acceptance. And finally, changes in one's behavior are often linked to navigating the various stereotypes that may be associated with Black South African chartered accountants. These themes will now be discussed individually and explored further in the remaining slides. The first theme on composition and diversity seeks to develop an understanding of the participants' current working environment, the racial composition of the work environment, and the sense of fitting in this work environment. Some of the common words that were constantly referred to in the interviews are feeling different, being the only one, and not fitting in. Participants described themselves as feeling different in their work environments. These differences were often associated with the dissimilarities in cultures, life experiences, lifestyles, language, and interests between Black people and the dominant race of white people in corporate South Africa. Some of the participants described their work environments as being somewhat diverse, but lacking diversity at the top, with top positions often being filled by white male Afrikaners. On the other hand, other participants described their work environments as completely lacking diversity. For instance, one of the participants, who is identified as P4, she is a Black female partner at an audit firm, and she expressed that she has often found herself as being the only one. P4's experience implies that at a junior level, there is seemingly much diversity. However, diversity quickly diminishes, and quite significantly so, at the senior and executive levels. All the participants expressed that at some point in their careers, they felt that they did not fit in when they found themselves in environments where diversity was lacking. As a result of not fitting in, participants have faced some form of pressure to adapt. This is supported in literature, which has shown a direct link between feelings and perceptions of fitting in and acting white. In this context, Black South African chartered accountants who feel they do not fit in are more likely to act white in the work environment than those who feel that they do fit in. The second theme, and arguably the most interesting theme, is the adaptation theme. This theme seeks to interrogate how Black chartered accountants may adapt to the work environment. This section will also help to define what acting white in the work environment means for a Black chartered accountant. The findings: all the participants code switch in at least one of the 4 types of code switching behaviors. Let's begin with speech. The most common way in which the participants code switch is by incorporating changes to their speech. The participants noted either changing their English accent to sound whiter or incorporating changes to their preferred language of use in the work environment. In this theme, there was a strong emphasis on speaking English and speaking English in a certain way. Lerato, a female participant, described this as the rolling out of the tongue. Tsepo, a male participant, described this as twanging. Through further probing, it became apparent that the participants who went to private schools were exposed to white culture earlier on, and this is where some of their code switching, including accent changes, would have been learned. Interestingly, these participants feel that their accent change is ingrained in them. They don't have to put any effort into it. The literature has shown and suggested that code switching can be a subconscious effort and often happens automatically. In addition to incorporating accent changes, the participants also cited language-specific changes. For instance, Dakaro, a female participant, felt pressure to learn Afrikaans because she was excluded from work-related conversations when her white colleagues spoke in Afrikaans. While on the other hand, Vusi, a male participant, pointed out how he often feels conflicted about expressing himself in isiXhosa, which is a native language in South Africa. The critical race theory suggests that racism can be institutional in nature. Although individuals can be racist, racism is not limited to individual discrimination. Rather, It is inherent in policies and system. The critical race theory judges how the social constructs of institutionalized racism may perpetuate a racial social class system that downgrades the standing of Black people to the lowest level. This may very well explain why Dakalo and Vusi have been hesitant to express themselves in their home language in the work environment, despite recognizing that the dominant white racial group may in some instances switch to their home language. The other way in which the participants cited code switching is by taking an interest in different hobbies and interests. So the participants pointed out that they have taken up different interests and hobbies that they typically would not have had an interest in as a way of adapting to their work environment. Vusi, a male participant, took an interest in cricket, baseball, and rugby. He mentioned that all he had previously known and considered as a sport as a Black person was running or athletics. But to fit in, he became more well versed in other sports. Sia, a male participant, took an interest in fine dining and had to learn menus because all he was accustomed to as a Black person was rice, potatoes, pumpkin, beans, and samp, which are typically a good starting point to preparing most African dishes. However, due to the pressure of fitting in, Sia found himself Googling menus of top restaurants before he went for events with his colleagues, just so he could fit in and understand which meals are socially acceptable to be ordered at such environments. Takalo, a female participant, noticed that there was more engagement and excitement from her white colleagues during their Monday catch-up meetings when they had to share on what they were doing during the weekend, when she pointed out that she had spent the weekend hiking. Dakalo highlighted that when she emphasized that she spent her time at home, relaxing and resting, there didn't seem to be much engagement. On the other hand, Anati, who is a female participant, expressed dampening down her true interest in amapiano and gqom music, which are South African house music genres. Instead, she presents herself as a person who enjoys pop music because it is more socially acceptable in front of her white colleagues to say that she enjoys listening to Taylor Swift as opposed to amapiano and gqom music. The other ways in which the participants have cited as changes that they have incorporated have been changes in their behavior. These included becoming less vocal, particularly in the face of discrimination, and laughing at jokes told by white managers, which they may not necessarily have found funny, and finally speaking and laughing more softly. The participants particularly felt strongly about being seen to be less vocal. For instance, one participant identified as Tando or P6 specified that she chooses to be less vocal as she fears being seen as a comrade and as a result risk her career becoming stagnant. The term comrade is quite a political one in the South African context. It originated during South Africa's anti-apartheid struggle. Activists and protesters used the term apartheid to refer to each other as members who shared a similar struggle against the apartheid regime. In South Africa's townships, the term comrade was also used to describe aggressive youth movements which resulted in radical anti-apartheid protests. In this context of this research study, the term comrade was synonymized to the Xhosa term amabutho, which means soldier. The term comrade is still widely used in political and social spaces as shown by Tando's expressed sentiment. In line with the latter description of the term comrade, Tando fears being seen as a person who is eager to fight, much like a soldier. In the work environment, this would entail being vocal, loud, opinionated, and opposing the status quo when necessary. Two other participants, Vusi and Lufuno, raised a similar point. And although they did not necessarily reference to the term comrade, they also shared similar views with Tando. For instance, Vusi expressed that he does not complain a lot, even in instances where he may believe that he is receiving unfair treatment. As a result, he believes that he is seen as the less risky one. The participants have expressed that they aren't vocal and that they don't complain much, but as a result, they have had to grow a thick skin. They have to be extra strong, particularly in the face of apparent discrimination. The other way in which the participants cited as changing in the work environment was through their dress code and appearance. Interestingly, the participants who cited making changes to their dress code and physical appearance were all female. These participants mentioned making changes to their preferred hairstyle, their choice of makeup, and dress code in the work environment. The female participants mentioned avoiding wearing out their natural hair in a bid to be taken seriously. They also avoided dressing up and applying makeup for fear of being accused of looking like a doll and not spending enough time on their work. Their sentiments were unfortunately valid. Literature has shown that Black African women are negatively stereotyped as less professional when they wear their hair in its natural state.
10 minutes, Michelle.
Thank you, Pauline. In addition to being deemed less professional, Black women who wear their natural hair may also be viewed as unkempt and radical. This theme has showed that participants adapt to environments where they feel they do not fit in. The ways in which participants may act white in the work environment are cemented upon the values and principles of their white colleagues, including their hobbies, their ways of dressing, and speech. The reasons why participants adapt to their work environment are to attain career progression, to seek social acceptance, and to navigate stereotypes. The third theme explores how the need for career progression can be a factor that pressures a Black South African chartered accountant into acting white in the work environment. In this theme, the importance of growth prospects, becoming a respected professional, and receiving buy-in, trust, and acceptance are presented. The analysis of the interview transcript showed that participants who incorporate changes to their accents, their hobbies, and their interests often do so to progress their careers. Interestingly, all the participants expressed the importance of career progression. There was a strong emphasis on career progression being associated with acting white by adopting accent changes, dress code, and physical appearance changes, and not necessarily being competent. I probed further to get a deeper understanding as to why the participants associated career progression with acting white as opposed to being a competent professional. One of the participants, who has been identified as Anati or P8, expressed that in corporate South Africa, it is not about competence. She highlighted that competence is only a tool that opens the door for Black South African chartered accountants, with the benefit of competence ending when you are offered the letter of employment. She further expressed that your career progression is more about if the white people in leadership positions like you. Ultimately, in this section, it became apparent that the participants are aware that the dominant racial group in corporate South Africa is the white race. Furthermore, they have also noticed that white people often make up and take up leadership positions and roles in the organizations that they work in. Therefore, white people in leadership positions may ultimately be responsible for reviewing, assessing performance, and impacting progression automatically. As a result, the participants, as career-driven individuals, may code switch in their work environments by acting white in order to progress their careers. This phenomenon aligns with the findings by Hammond, which indicate that Black article clerks often received positive feedback from their white supervisors only after they had established connections with them. This section has shown how important career growth prospects, becoming a respected professional, and receiving buy-in, trust, and acceptance are to Black South African chartered accountants. In this research study, career progression was identified as the greatest factor that forces Black South African chartered accountants to act white in the work environment. The fourth theme considers how seeking social acceptance can be a factor that pressures a Black South African chartered accountant into acting white in the work environment. The importance of cultivating social capital in the work environment is a key factor in this theme. In the literature reviewed, it was observed that members of a marginalized group may code switch to reflect a particular social status. In the research study, it was found that there is a close link between seeking social acceptance and adapting to the work environment by taking an interest in different hobbies. As a result, the participants who took on an interest in different hobbies were more likely to do so to seek social acceptance. Due to the vast differences in lifestyles between the two racial groups, as highlighted in the second theme on adaptation, Black South African chartered accountants
Michelle,
struggle
5
to cope.
minutes.
Thank you, Pauline.
Okay.
Black South African chartered accountants struggle to cope in social settings. The participants mentioned feeling excluded and those feelings having a negative impact on their overall experience in the work environment. Some participants also pointed out how they fear expressing their true interests, which may be different from those of the dominant white racial group. Overall, the participants clearly expressed that building social capital and rapport is important. There is also an expressed sentiment that social acceptance is a necessary tool for building career progression. Therefore, it appears that there is a direct link between social acceptance and career progression. Building social capital in the work environment may be a factor that allows for Black South African chartered accountants' career to grow at a faster pace as expressed by Dakalo or P7. This theme has conveyed how Black South African chartered accountants want to be accepted in their work environments. They want to fit in and be part of a team. However, presenting themselves as Black may take away from these aspirations, which is an aspect that was expressed in the literature review. There are other studies that suggest that being one's true authentic self in the workplace has advantages for one's career progression and general work-related well-being. However, individuals belonging to minority groups do tend to benefit from adjusting their self-presentation. This section has shown how seeking social acceptance may be a factor that forces Black South African chartered accountants into acting white in the work environment. The final theme on navigating stereotypes. In this theme, participants mentioned that navigating stereotypes associated with Black people is a factor that compels them into acting white in the work environment. The participants who made changes to their behavior were more likely to do so to navigate stereotypes. The negative stereotypes that were described by the participants include Black people being associated with low-level skills, being controversial, loud, disruptive, risky, troublesome, and too bold. Tabo, who is a male participant, feels that his Blackness is associated with a low level of skills. Tabo expressed that those perceptions of him being lowly skilled only change when he speaks. This is because Tabo sounds white, and due to the way he sounds, he receives more buy-in and acceptance from his white colleagues. The other participants referred to the stereotype of being seen as loud and disruptive. For instance, a female participant identified as Lerato or P9 is one of the participants who does not consider herself as a person who code switches in her work environment. Although Lerato was less outspoken when she was younger and starting out her career, she has since become more vocal in her work environment. However, Lerato expressed that her outspoken nature is often not well received by her white colleagues in leadership positions, and this has been much to the detriment of her career progression. On the other hand, a male participant identified as Vusi or P3 has taken a more conservative approach. Vusi has chosen to completely disassociate with Black African people who may be speaking isiXhosa, which is a native South African language, in the work environment to navigate the stereotypes associated with this group.
Michelle,
Vusi
1 minute.
Thank you, Pauline. I'll
Sorry.
just conclude. Vusi believes that Black South African chartered accountants may be stereotyped as loud and troublesome, especially when they speak in their native languages. While white people will think these ones are loud and this is what Vusi feels. And now, although Vusi would usually want to engage with other Xhosa-speaking people, he fears being stereotyped, and so he does not engage. As a result, he is viewed as less troublesome. However, Vusi expressed that his Black African friends in the work environment have often teased him and implied that Vusi significantly changes who he is and that they do not recognize him when he is at work. This is indicative of the downsides of code switching. It may lead to accusations of acting white, which has negative social consequences. Vusi did express that it does bother him that his friends have these perceptions of him. However, he mentioned that meeting his career goals and aspirations is way more important to him than being accepted by his Black friends in the work environment. This section of the research has highlighted how Black people may code switch to navigate stereotypes and to avoid the implicit racial biases that may be associated with Black African people. And finally, just to conclude, I'll be another 3 minutes, sorry, Pauline. The findings reflected in this research provide an opportunity to gain a better understanding of the lived experiences of a marginalized group, which is a paramount for transformation. This research sought to establish an understanding of the factors that pressure Black chartered accountants to act white in the work environment. The overarching finding of this research is that all the participants recognized the importance of acting white in the work environment as a tool for success. The participants unanimously expressed that success for a Black South African chartered accountant is tied to deliberately assimilating white behavior and mannerisms. As a result, this research also established a definition of what acting white in the work environment means for a Black South African chartered accountant. Through the lens of the critical race theory, code switching and acting white, an interpretation and explanation of the analysis of results is presented, which is underpinned by the rich history of South Africa. All in all, the findings of this research can be summarized as the diagram on the screen. The findings presented suggest that Black South African chartered accountants do face pressure to act white in the work environment. This pressure stems from the lack of diversity in their work environments, which makes it difficult to fit in. As a result, Black South African chartered accountants adapt to their work environments by adopting the behaviors and mannerisms of the dominant group, that is, the white racial group. The code switching behaviors employed by Black South African chartered accountants include speech, dress code, and appearance, hobbies and interests, as well as behavior changes. To attain career progression, social acceptance, and navigate the stereotypes associated with Black people, Black chartered accountants act white in the work environment. I will now open up the floor to some questions.
Sorry, I was going to act as discussant briefly. Michelle, can you hear me?
Yes, I can
Yeah,
hear you,
yeah, that's
honey.
fine. Okay, I'll be quick. Hello, Dina. Thank you. That was an absolutely fabulous presentation. A mixture of being really analytical, using your three theories, and really lively, as you said, taking a sort of live lived experience perspective. So major points that come up for me is, and I think this is something you highlight, is that things have been freed up and liberalised a great deal for the black, maybe just the black middle class 30 years ago. But of course, there is this lag, if you want to be charitable, between what's actually happened in the workplace. And so what is interesting is that there is partial acceptance only of Black chartered accountants. Not only do they have to show competence, as one of your interviewees says, but that it just gets them through the door and getting a job. Once they're in the workplace, they have to radically change who they feel they are and how they behave. So I think there is so much fabulous work. I mean, what you've done is really interesting that could build on this. As I think I said to you today before your presentation, you could build an entire career on the basis of this work, developing it in certain directions. So there's the gender aspect. I only noticed a bit later that you've got 6 women in your I wouldn't call it sample, but it'd be interesting to know they will probably have a somewhat changed experience as you've begun to discuss of what being black in the professional workplace is like. Another point I think I may have mentioned was very good. You've got a mix of tribal or ethnic groups there with different home languages. So again, I think you could do really interesting work using some ideas from linguistics and from critical discourse analysis to see patterns uh, themes that emerge. And of course, on top of that, there's also the issue of silence, of what is not said, which is often ignored in that sort of analysis. Um, I mentioned before, I think there's the issue of the chartered accountancy profession in different African countries. So there's like Nigeria, which has a different history, although similar in some respects. And then what else did I think? There's just so much. Um, I think I mentioned this briefly to you earlier, but may not have explained it properly. I think one of the reasons why there is, say, this resistance to black chartered accountants getting promoted more and how they have to adapt is that chartered accountants, historically, certainly in England, were very close to capital markets and their expertise was used for raising finance in various ways. Um, I don't know much about the South African context, but it would be interesting to see how those ideas played out. So, are the people who are already at the top, in a sense, guarding their privileged access? And some interesting work in this area is a classic work on the sociology of the professions by Andrew Abbott, which is 1988, which is cited a huge number of times in anything that looks at the profession. When I looked last night, there were over 20,000 citations to his work. I could go on and on, but that's not the point of today. All these ideas strike you on hearing about this work. So I'll just say, thank you very much, Michelle. And you've got a lot of work ahead of you if you want as an academic researcher. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome, Feline. Thank you for having me as well.
Okay, now the next bit is Q&As, which obviously we'll let Michelle answer because she's got the expertise. So I'll just hope that I can manage the technical aspects of Teams. I can't actually see the far right of the screen.
Uh,
Good. Dino's stepping
yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah, Pauline, I'm here. And if let's see if you have any questions, anyone. I think, yeah,
Sorry, Dinar, if you can just give me 1 minute, everybody should have
sure.
access very, very shortly
Okay, but
to the
anyone
cameras
who
and
has a
mics.
question, yeah, can raise their hand so I can come for the question. I think it was really interesting presentation, Michelle, and it was. I think Pauline has covered really well in her discussion. Let's see. I haven't seen the hands. Yes, Theo, go on. Thank you.
Hi, many thanks. That was a very, very good presentation. I very much enjoyed it, and especially your argument about code switching and presentation switching. I kept thinking whether this kind of presentation switching, code switching is happening across other um, um, other characteristics. Perhaps, I mean, you based it on race, but I guess it's also gender. Is it not happening there? And is it unique in South Africa? Or we could actually think of theorizing and generalizing more these kind of findings in other contexts. So I was just wondering. So, for example, the critical race theory, which is quite important theory, whether this can extend to include these other elements. And I was also wondering about intersectionality. What about those who have different characteristics together, and they have to do, are forced to do multiple adaptations? So I was just wondering about this and would like your views.
Okay. That's a very interesting question, Theo. Thank you for that. So you are 100% spot on. We very well could have isolated the study and focused on female identifying only participants. Something that came across quite strongly as I was speaking to the female identifying participants is that some of their struggles were very unique to them. If we just focus on the one example, which was about where the way they wear their natural hair at work, and the way they have tried not to put on so much makeup at work because the perception is that Black African women are not hardworking enough, and so spending extra time looking pretty would give the impression that they're spending way too much time in front of the mirror and not actually working on their work that has been assigned to them. And on that point as well, I've seen a lot of studies in the USA that speak about how Black African women find themselves needing to code switch the most in work environments. So agree with you 100%. We could have isolated the genders and seen some interesting insights on that. In terms of expanding it and generalizing it to different nations and other countries, I also think that would provide quite some unique insights. I think every country's history is very rich and unique, and I think that is the differentiating factor. So in South Africa, because of this history of apartheid and colonization, the experiences are they center around the feelings that were associated with that period and how Black people felt during that time. Most of those factors are still filtering into corporate South Africa today. And so because of that unique aspect that comes with history, I think it may be a bit hard to generalize the findings across the board.
Thanks. Anyone else
Thank you.
has a question? Anyone else has a question for Michelle? Uzma, please go ahead.
Hi, Michelle. Really
Hi,
lovely, detailed presentation. So thank you very much for that. I certainly recognise, obviously not the specifics and the detail and the depth, but the broad ideas that you're talking about as applicable to lots of different kinds of contexts. It's very recognisable. And I'm particularly interested in what you're saying about here. Because as you may or may not know, certainly in the UK, there are court cases, there are national news stories of particularly girls, but also boys, almost being banned from school because the school making black hair illegal. It's too big, or it's too something or other. But I guess what and perhaps I didn't hear you saying this enough. I'm really interested in what, from what you've studied, what the costs are for Black South Africans when they have to make those accommodations. How does it impact on their friendships, their relationships, their family networks, and their own home communities? And I'm thinking of that specifically, perhaps, and I think you did mention these for people who those accommodations are so well pronounced, so heavily accented that they almost don't notice anymore that they're doing them.
Yeah.
I mean, and I speak, if you like, as somebody from the Caribbean who doesn't speak what I might consider my home
Yeah.
language anymore. I'm born and brought up in this country in very, you know, European circles, completely comfortable in those circles. If I go to Jamaica, people will call me a foreigner.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering what your research says about that dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up because that was one of the key things that my participants highlighted. They felt that they don't belong in any space. So they don't belong at work and they also don't belong at home. So at work, they have to put on this facade of being white, and when they get home, they are perceived as being too white. Okay, so at home, they're perceived as being a traitor of their heritage and where they come from. That was one of the struggles that the participants highlighted. The other participants pointed out that they have had their friends specifically mark them and let them know that, look, listen, you are a completely different person when you're at work. We don't know you. We don't know who this person is. And that participant said that it did bother them that their friends felt that way and had that impression of them. But ultimately, that participant felt that what was more important to them was climbing the corporate ladder as opposed to getting buy-in from their friends. The other participant plainly stated that it was just exhausting, like emotionally and physically exhausting. And after a day of work, when she gets home, it's like a weight has been lifted off her shoulders because she finally doesn't have to be something that she's not. So a lot of it was just seeing this emotional toil and battle that the participants have and not really knowing where to position themselves in the world, because in one space they're not accepted because they're not good enough, and then in another world, which is at home, where they expect to be accepted, they also aren't because they don't fit in there as well.
Thank you.
Aisha?
Thanks. Any other question for Michelle? It was really fascinating. Theo, go on.
Yes, I was
Sorry,
just
yes,
going to.
just
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. Go on, Theo.
Sorry, no, I just wanted just to put another dimension, which is that of justice and that of relational justice, because what happens to those who choose not to adapt, presumably they get excluded or they get oppressed. Even those who choose to adapt, they do so, but they're forced to do so. So there is an element of relational justice which you might want to theorize further from these particular cases, and that would be quite interesting because it goes beyond other types of injustices, for example, material resource-based injustices, and these are focused particularly on relations within certain contexts. So I'm just putting that as a possibility.
Yeah. Thank you, Theo. That's actually a very interesting angle to take, which, I guess was briefly triggered during the interview process when one participant thought that she does not code switch, but turns out that she actually does. But anyway, um, in that interview, what came across is she feels that as a result of her not code switching, she has just been excluded from career progression, and that in the moment when she is vocal, her ideas are, said to be appreciated, but when it comes to reality, it's not really acceptable to have a differing opinion from the voices of the white dominant racial group, particularly those in leadership positions. So that's quite an interesting angle that I would very much like to look into. So thank you for pointing that out, Theo.
Thanks. Pauline, you wanted to make any comment? You were saying something and then...
Yeah, sorry. What's just strikes me, I should explain that I've actually got the same professional background as Michelle. I trained with a Big Four in London and worked for a while as an accountant. So what also strikes me, and I said this to Michelle some time ago, in the UK, traditionally, chartered accountants, members of that particular institute, have been sort of the highest status and sort of guarded their access to the best paid work, dealing with the stock exchange and so on. However, there are also other qualified groups of accountants. Peter Armstrong has written about this, such as the Chartered Management Accountants, CIMA, and CIMA is an international body of professional accountants, and I guess it probably operates in South Africa as well, does it? So, yeah, so my question is there some sort of hierarchy and differentiation between the career progress of the different types of qualified accountants in the various workplaces?
Yeah.
Are you aware of that?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's
So
yet another thing you could go and look at.
yeah. No, that's definitely a very interesting angle. And there is a number of accounting bodies that accountants can choose from. So
Yeah.
we do have the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. We also
Yes.
do have CIMA, which is for the management accountants. And we also have ACCA, which I believe is
Yeah.
a UK accounting body. And we have a few other which are from South Africa. And there is a clear hierarchy in terms of which professional body is viewed as better. The South African Institute of Chartered Accountants ranks higher in terms of the professional body for accountants in South Africa. And so you do see a whole lot more preference being given to chartered accountants in terms of jobs and all of that. It would be interesting though to see if, based on the different professional body membership, if it really changes the insights into whether people act white or not. I doubt it would. But yeah, that's interesting to look at and consider.
That's another PhD for you to follow.
Lots of
So I'll
PhDs.
shut up now. Thank you, Dina. Yeah.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Pauline. Anyone else has a question for Michelle before we close the seminar? I think it seems to have we have covered the question. Thanks a lot for Michelle for really fascinating and interesting presentation, and Pauline for chairing the session as well as giving the suggestions about this. We are really happy. The next IKD seminar is going to be on 19th of March, and it's going to be on of decolonizing peace education in Africa project. I think Craig and one of the partners of the project are going to discuss some of the outcomes from the project in the seminar. I will get back to you with more details. Again, thanks, Michelle, Pauline, and everyone who attended the seminar, and hopefully we'll see you next time as well. Thanks, everyone.
Yes,
Thank
thank you,
you.
Dina. Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you. Okay, thank you both.
Thank you, Dina. Thank you, Pauline.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Bye.